Welcome back. All right, panic index. Why not? So, there are going to be people getting a notification when this video was live saying it's the middle of summer. Why? But I wanted to talk about it from a point of view of which teams I feel like are under the most pressure to have a good start to the season. So I always do a power rankings in the offseason about which teams I think have the most pressure to win a Stanley Cup. This is not that. This is pressure to have a good start. Fans that want to see a team do well out of the gate, because if they don't, panic may set in quickly. The panic is at the top in this one. The happy fans that aren't going to care if their team has a slow start will be at the bottom of the board. In fact, I'm optimistic that I can fit them all to a point where the happiness can be here, and I should be able to fit 16 for the West in here, 16 for the East in here, and now that I've said it, we'll see whether or not I can. But yeah, so this is about which teams are under the most pressure, I think, to have a really good start to the season. And I've sort of randomized them from when I had them on the board earlier today. Starting in the East with Ottawa. I think Ottawa's under a lot of pressure. I think if Ottawa has a slow start, I think the panic's going to set in. I'm going to leave room for teams atop of them, teams that will have more pressure to have a good start. But for Ottawa, yeah, I mean, missing the playoffs and going through a rebuild can be trying, and then when that rebuild is supposed to be done, that's where things can get really trying as well. I do think there's a lot of pressure on Ottawa to have a good start and to get this season rolling. Now, of course, Ottawa fans are going to say, hey, November. I know, but if they don't have a good October, November's probably not going to matter that much. Next up is Carolina. Carolina, I don't think, is under the same amount of pressure as some of the other teams to have a really good start. And I think with Carolina's depth, with Carolina's recent track record, if they get off to a bit of a sloppy start, I don't think Canes fans are going to get too upset. I think for Canes fans, the view is, full 82-game season, get the playoffs, and then whatever you do in the playoffs is going to define whether or not this year is a success. That's the level that Carolina's at. I don't think the regular season's going to matter nearly as much. St. Louis, I don't think St. Louis fans are concerned with a really good start. And so I'm going to put them right near the bottom, that if St. Louis fans see a bad start, then we'll start talking about Celebrini. We'll start talking about other potential number one draft picks for next year. And that'll be the extent of the conversation for St. Louis fans. I don't get the feeling that there is as much pressure on them as there would have been in previous years. Nowhere near. LA Kings. Yeah, LA's going to have some pressure. I would say a good start is important. They added Dubois. They lost a bit in that trade. And if they get off to a slow start, I think that we'll see the Todd McClellan discussion come up, because it did last time they had a slow start. Right away I was seeing McClellan's the wrong coach for this team, and Rob Blake's got bad ideas for how to set this team up. Like, it doesn't take that long. So we'll see with the Kings, and again, coming off of back-to-back seasons where they played well, they didn't get very far in the playoffs. I think there's pressure to get off to that good start, maybe win the division this year, that kind of thing. Calgary. Oh, Calgary's under some pressure. I'm going to put Calgary at the same level as LA, which might be a bit of a cop-out. But yeah, Calgary's under some pressure to do well out of the gate. With the players that they've lost over the last two off seasons, and with all of the discussion about who may want out next, you have to get off to a good start, especially since that might convince guys like Lindholm to stick around. That might convince Backlund, hey, I'm going to stick around. I think Backlund will. But for Lindholm, I think that's really important. Should he still be a member of the Flames once we reach October? And I think he will be. I think that, the more signings we see, the more teams are up against the cap, the harder it is to make a big trade like that. So yeah, Lindholm, I think, is still going to be there. And a good, fast start, really strong team could convince him to stick around. Dallas, I mean, there's some pressure, but it's Dallas. I never feel like Dallas is a team that's under the same amount of pressure as other teams in the National Hockey League. They're not an original six franchise. Dallas fans, I think, are more laid back with Dallas than other fans are with their teams. And if Dallas has a slow start, again, there's a lot of depth there. There's a good young core, and I think the expectation would be that they'll get through it and they'll get back into the playoff hunt. So I don't think there's as much pressure with Dallas. New Jersey. Devils fans want to win. I'm going to put them at the same level as Ottawa. I'm not going to put them right at the very top. Again, there's a couple teams that I know I'm going to put at the very top. At least one I can think of, and I'm sure fans can think of that as well. But New Jersey, I think there will be pressure. I think there's going to be way more pressure this year than there has been in a very long time. But yeah, I don't think it's top level pressure. Like if they're 4-6 out of the gate, Devils fans will be all like, "That's it, we suck. We're back in the cellar." There's just too much good young talent there. Winnipeg. Winnipeg, I don't feel like there's as much pressure as we have with LA and Calgary. But I do think there's more than Dallas. So let me move this around here. And I'll put Winnipeg here. That if Winnipeg gets off to a slow start, we may hear the rebuild, retool talk, but I don't think it'll be full-on panic. I may be a little off on that. Maybe Winnipeg fans are, tired of the idea of just being on the edge, and they want to have a good team and they want to go to, every fan base wants to win a Stanley Cup, so that's a whole other discussion. But I think for Winnipeg there's some pressure there. I don't think it's as strong as it is in LA or in Calgary. And again, Winnipeg's got some of the same issues as Calgary does in terms of, guys potentially wanting out and huge upheaval in their lineup. We'll see. And if Winnipeg did, say, for instance, trade Scheifele and Hellebuck, and if they downgraded, that might downgrade the panic part of things. So between now and the start of the season, it's possible that changes are made, and we see Winnipeg drop on this board if I do another one before the season starts. All right, New York Islanders. I think there's some pressure on the Islanders. I don't know that I would put it any farther up than the Canes, though, because with the Islanders, they're middle of the pack. They're a team that I think if they drop out of the playoff picture early, again, I don't know how much pressure there is on the Islanders this year. Obviously, there are those that would like to see them doing well, and as I said with Winnipeg, obviously there's fans that would like to see Stanley Cups and all that. But I don't think that Islander fans would panic because Sorokin reasons. So you have Ilya Sorokin in net, and he's going to go on a run. And so, yeah, I don't think there would be a lot of panic in the event of a slow start for the Islanders. Capitals, I don't think there's a lot of pressure on the Caps, but I will put it ahead of Carolina and the Islanders for the simple reason that the Capitals, the moves they made in the offseason, tell you they're not giving up on playoffs, that they're not giving up on the idea that they could stay in the hunt for another Stanley Cup run. So if they get off to a rough start, I think there could be some panic there. That being said, they should get some young guys into the lineup, and we'll see how that goes for them this season. Florida's got some pressure. They've got some pressure. Now, the run to the Stanley Cup final, that was fun, but I do think Florida's got some pressure. If Florida gets off to a rough start, let's say they were 3-7 out of the gate or 3-6-1, I do think there'd be some fans who are kind of ticked off. I think that for Florida, with the President's Trophy followed by the run to the Stanley Cup final, there are expectations with the Panthers. And I think it's really important to keep that attendance going in the right direction and everything, that the team stays strong. So I think there's some pressure in Florida. Again, I'm not putting them at the very top. So Pittsburgh. And here's where it gets interesting with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh and Washington kind of tied at the hip here, aren't they? So Pittsburgh, moves they've made in the offseason have made it clear that they still see themselves as being in the hunt. And when Kyle Dubas was brought on, it was with the idea that, hey, maybe this guy can keep us in the hunt for a playoff spot / Stanley Cup. So they get Riley Smith. They go out, they sign some free agents as well. And so we'll see in the fall how Pittsburgh turns out. They doubled down on Jari. And so, yeah, Pittsburgh's in an interesting position where they fell out of the playoffs. They definitely look like, with the age progression, this is what happens. Teams age out of being contenders. But there's some pressure on them to perform well out of the gate because they've continued to double down on going with veterans, older players, and they don't have a wealth of young prospects either in Pittsburgh, not the top level prospects, right? So I think there's some pressure in Pittsburgh. Montreal, I don't perceive there's any pressure in Montreal. I'm even going to put them lower than St. Louis when I look across the board here. I'm going to put Montreal even lower down. I don't think there's any pressure on Montreal if they have a rough start. Oh, well, you're going to get another really good draft pick. There's good young players here. They're building a core that I think is going to be able to win, but they're not perceived to be a team that's in the hunt for the playoffs right now. So, yeah, Montreal, I don't think there's any pressure on them. Toronto belongs here, don't they? There's nowhere else I can put Toronto. The expectations for Toronto are always ridiculously high. The pressure on Toronto is always ridiculously high. That has been the case through the entire Auston Matthews era, and I don't see that changing this year. In fact, with the expiring contracts to Matthews and Nylander, if they don't get them signed officially by the start of the season, that's going to increase the pressure because there's going to be this mentality of this might be the last chance for this core to win, and we don't know what's going to happen next year, so this might be their final chance. So Toronto, tons of pressure, and I've been talking about pressure in Toronto for many years now. Anaheim, I'll say Anaheim has less pressure than St. Louis. Anaheim, I don't think there's any expectation that a team that finished 32nd this past season is going to make the playoffs. And if they have a rough start, that's not what Anaheim fans are worried about. What are they going to be worried about? How do the kids look? How do the young players look? How are things going with the new coach? Will Greg Cronin's systems take a long time to get players to buy into, or will that be right away? And so I think it's going to be more about the progression of each individual player than the team as a whole. So if the team is 2-7-1, but all the young players are going well and the systems seem to be helping them out with just their basics and their fundamentals, I think fans will still be happy. Chicago, right with Anaheim. Again, it's a very similar story with Chicago. How's Bedard playing? Are people helping Bedard? Where's Bedard right now? Why isn't Bedard on the ice? Oh my gosh. The one panic would be if something happened with Bedard. But outside of that, there's no concern, I don't believe, with their record this year. I expect Chicago to still be pretty bad. Better than last season, but probably still pretty bad. Wouldn't be surprised if they ended up finishing at the bottom of the standings, to be honest. But yeah, Chicago, I don't think there's any pressure. Arizona. Now, normally I would have Arizona at the very bottom and say there's no pressure. I will put them with St. Louis, though, a little bit more than Chicago and Anaheim. I think that Arizona's built a pretty strong roster, pretty strong young roster, and now they've added Cooley, right? He signs with them rather than going back to Minnesota. And so, yeah, for the Arizona Coyotes, I think there's a little bit of pressure, not a ton. I think if they started the season as poorly as they have in recent years, I think that would be frustrating. But they're not starting the season with a 14-game road trip, so that's a bonus. They won't be playing, what was it, like 20 out of 22 to start the season. We're on the road or something like that. Like, they won't be doing that this year. So I think the expectations are a better record. I think they'll get there. I think they could be a 500 team. I think there's that little bit of pressure there. Philadelphia. Oh, Philadelphia doesn't have pressure. Philadelphia's down here with Montreal. Philadelphia, it's going to be a similar story. How's Forrester progressing? Is Tortorella the right guy behind the bench? So when Philadelphia's not playing well, I'm sure Tortorella will be under a microscope. But in terms of the team's record, I mean, the expectations have been tempered, and so I don't foresee Philadelphia fans being too upset if the team's not winning. Now, if the team's not winning and you're seeing problems with effort and you're seeing potential issues with players and management, or ice time's, controversial about who's getting it and who's not, then we're having a different discussion. But the actual record, I don't think is going to matter. The Rangers are under some pressure. I'm going to put the Rangers at the top. And the reason's simple. You've got Shesterkin's in his prime right now. You've got guys like Zibanejad, Panarin, Kreider, Keandre Miller. There's a really good core there. The team needs to win. If the team has a really rough start to the season, now, one can argue that Shesterkin, Sorokin, it's a similar story, but it feels like with the Rangers, because they went to that Final Four, because they've been seen as more of a contender than the Islanders, I think there's more pressure on them to do well right out of the gate and to have that really strong start. So if they fall off, they fall behind, I think we'll be more likely to see complaints than we would with the New York Islanders should they have a slow start. Minnesota's a tough one. Now, of course, Philip Gustafson going to arbitration. We'll see how that all turns out. Minnesota, I do think there's some pressure. I don't know how much, but I'm going to put them here. I'm going to put them here because I think most Minnesota fans understand that with the dead cap money, and I know there are those that are tired of me talking about it, but it's a lot of money. That's a lot of cap space you do not have that most other teams do have. And it limits what you can do. It takes probably 2 good players that you could add completely off the board. So for Minnesota, it's a tough situation. I do think that They're still going to be in the mix. Are they going to be a playoff team? We'll see, right? Bill Guerin's doing his best, and I think that's why they've promoted him to team president, is that, he's doing the best that he can. He's towed the line pretty well. And so I don't think there's that much pressure on Minnesota to be great out of the gate. Boston, I'm going to say straight out, there's less pressure in Boston than others. We understand Bergeron's gone. We understand Krejci's gone. They had a ridiculously good season that then was thwarted in the first round by the Florida Panthers. And so I don't think expectations are very high with Boston. And if Boston out of the gate was 4-6 or 4-5-1, I think we'd look at that. And again, unless they find a way to replace Bergeron or Krejci, and that's not easy, it's impossible to replace Bergeron. Bergeron and Krejci, I know there's players on the team that can step up, like Coyle and Zacha, but it's not the same, obviously. So I don't think there's a lot of pressure on Boston to do really well out of the gate. I think the expectation is they're going to fall back. How much they fall back is the question, of course. And so, yeah, I don't think there's as much pressure on them to have a really good start. San Jose, I don't think there's any pressure in San Jose. So what's interesting is I've got 5 in the West so far that I don't feel like have any pressure. 2 in the East that I feel like don't have any pressure either. So, that gets into that, is there an imbalance in the teams? And we have that discussion every regular season. I'm sure we'll have it this year as well. But San Jose, I'm putting right down in that level of, there's no pressure on them to do well. If they're 1-9-0 out of the gate, I think the question then becomes, why haven't they traded Karlsson yet? And I think that'll be what all the articles about San Jose are going to be, in the event that Karlsson's still a Shark this fall. If they started the season 1-9, it wouldn't be articles of, can you believe how bad San Jose is? They'd be articles of, can you believe that Erik Karlsson is spending the final years of his career on a franchise that clearly is trending towards the bottom of the league? So that's the difference between pressure and not pressure for the team. Edmonton, there's a lot of pressure in Edmonton. This is a team that needs to win. Coming out of the season in 2022 where they got to the conference final, they lose against Colorado, I think things look pretty good. Right now, it looks like they started to trend in the wrong direction, right? So they ended up being out in the second round this year instead. So they need to continue that progression in the regular season. They need to show that they can score just as well 5-on-5 as they can on the power play. And if they figure that out, they might put up 400 goals in a year because their power play was ridiculous. But I do think there's a lot of pressure to get off to a really good start and win the division. I think the expectation for Edmonton has to be to win the division. It's time to stop messing around, get first in the Pacific, have that home ice advantage through the first 2 rounds at minimum, and really build on it. Buffalo. Oh, there's pressure in Buffalo. I'm going to put Buffalo right. I will kind of want to put them at the top. But I'm going to put them at the same level as Ottawa, New Jersey, Florida. For Buffalo, another season where they missed the playoffs. It does feel like they're trending in the right direction. Therefore, ergo, I don't want to go too far into Matrix. Anyways, so vis-a-vis. All right, so Buffalo, I think the expectation is playoffs for Sabres fans, and it should be. This is one year I'm going to say to Sabres fans, you have every right to expect playoffs from a team that was offensively great. Defensively, I think they've shored things up a little bit. I think if they have the right goaltending as well, absolutely. And a good start would go a long way towards building that excitement in the market. They need some excitement in the Buffalo market where they haven't had playoffs since, I think it's 1947, somewhere in that region anyways. It feels like it's been that long since Buffalo was in the playoffs. Detroit, there's pressure with Detroit. I don't think it's as high, though. So for Detroit, a team that under Steve Yzerman, I think, has built a really, really strong pipeline. A lot of good young players, a lot of good prospects coming in as well. If Detroit gets off to an iffy start, I don't think it's going to be as tough for Detroit fans as it might be for fans of teams ahead of them. And again, I think for Detroit fans that see the big picture, it is a gradual process. It's not fun when that process is gradual, of course. New Jersey showed last year. If that process just all of a sudden works, it's great. And one of Detroit, Buffalo, or Ottawa could be that next team that just has this just explosive upward swing in the standings. And suddenly we're talking about, well, they're a playoff team, and it just becomes fait accompli. They're going to stay in the playoffs like New Jersey has going into this season. I don't think anybody's going to be picking them to miss the playoffs. Nashville, there's not pressure in Nashville. But I'm going to put them ahead of St. Louis for the fact that clearly there's players on this team that feel like they're still going to be a playoff team. And I think there are some fans who look at this squad and say, for the right at the right, if we do this right here, we could be on that cusp of a wild card spot, maybe snag that the last couple weeks of the season, right? So I don't think there's a lot of pressure. I'm not going to put them in the same category as these teams up here, but I'm not going to say there's no pressure either. So I'm going to have them above those 5 teams. Vegas. Vegas just won the Cup. I think a slow start, I mean, I don't think it's going to cause a lot of panic. I think if Vegas gets off to a slow start, I think Vegas fans are going to be okay with that. I don't think it's going to cause any panic because the Stanley Cup always makes you feel better about things. Because you'll look and go, man, we're outside the playoffs, but we had that Stanley Cup a few months ago. That was pretty good. So if this is the price we pay, so be it. And again, the Stanley Cup hangover is a thing. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Vegas goes through that. It's not outside the realm of possibility that really any team in the Final Four could go through that, where they haven't had as long of an off season. You might have some more nagging injuries. And of course, we know Florida has nagging injuries as well, which I'm sure some Florida fans are going to say, hey, we have injuries. Why would we have all that pressure? Because people are going to want to see that progression from year to year. So Vegas, I don't think will have as much because they won the Stanley Cup. Vancouver, there's pressure. I don't know if it's as high as LA and Calgary, and I'm going to say it's not, but there's pressure. If Vancouver gets off to a slow start, pitchforks are going to be out quickly. This is a fan base that is not going to be happy if it doesn't look like Vancouver's made that progression. So, yes, there's absolutely pressure in Vancouver. I don't have expectations with Vancouver. I've gone through this too many times, but there are fans that do. And so if this team gets off to a slow start, the bandwagon's going to empty quickly. So, Vancouver needs to get off to a good start. They need to basically solidify themselves as preferably a top 3 team in the Pacific, which is a tall task, right? You've got Edmonton, you've got LA, you've got Vegas. Those the likeliest to be the top 3. Even though LA's gone through some changes, Vegas could have a Stanley Cup hangover, but Vancouver may not be the one to jump in if Calgary has a big bounce back here. So I don't think the Pacific is very easy at all. Even though I've got San Jose and Anaheim down here, I still think it's going to be tough. Colorado, there's some pressure in Colorado. Now, they won the Stanley Cup in 2022. They lose in the first round this past season. I'm going to say that Colorado, not under the same amount of pressure as LA, Calgary, or Edmonton in the West, but yeah, it's still there. Colorado fans are going to want to get off to a good start. They've had a pretty full off season, chance for guys to get healed up. There's going to be pressure on Val Nichushkin, too, to get off to a good start and kind of not talk about whatever we don't know about that may or may not have happened. Weird stuff, right? But anyways, for Colorado, I think it's important for them to get off to a good start. I'm not going to say that the panic is going to be right up here if they don't have a good start, but yeah, they need that. Tampa Bay, I think people understand that Tampa Bay has been through a lot of hockey over the last 4 or 5 years. And so while I do think that Tampa Bay has some pressure, I don't think there's a ton. I think if Tampa Bay had a slow start to the season, I think there'd be people who would be understanding. And, that many years of contending, it takes it out of you. And they've lost some depth as well over the last few seasons. So I don't think it's going to be entirely surprising. And, Tampa Bay fans, they have the 2 Stanley Cups. And so I think that takes some of the pressure off as well. And 3 straight Stanley Cup final appearances. Columbus. Columbus has some pressure. Absolutely. Columbus, they go out, they get Severson. They go out and get Provorov. Werenski's coming back. And the moves that have been made that basically signal this team thinks they can jump back into the playoff hunt. If they get off to a slow start, fans are going to be kind of ticked. And I would imagine that attacking the contracts is going to start if they get off to a slow start. If they get off to a really good start, suddenly Jarmo Kekalainen's a brilliant general manager, and you're good, right? Columbus, I do think there's some pressure, which leaves us with Seattle. We're ending with Seattle. Seattle's a tough call because Seattle, of course, underachieved in year 1 for most people's expectations, overachieved in year 2 for people's expectations, got to the second round. But I don't know that Seattle fans have a lot of panic. They're a pretty chill bunch, and I think they understand it's year 3. So if Seattle has a rough start, I don't think there's going to be a lot of calls for firing the coach or clearly Ron Francis doesn't know what he's doing or this team's just terrible. There would be some non-Seattle fans jumping in and saying, see, I knew they were a flash in the pan, but Seattle I don't think is under pressure to get, into the playoffs right out of the gate. I think that, the expectation would be, all right, so we've started a little slow, well, we'll be able to pick it up. So for me, the most pressure I would say is Edmonton, Toronto, I'd say the Rangers, LA, Calgary, Ottawa, New Jersey, Florida, Buffalo. Interestingly enough, I've only got 3 in the West that I feel like there's a lot of pressure, and 6 in the East. And of course, there's a lot of talk about the East being better than the West. I would say there's more pressure on teams in the East than pressure on teams in the West. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. And yes, the fact that media presences are technically more dense in the Eastern time zones, and I think those teams get more coverage, may lead to more pressure as well. But let me know your thoughts on that. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.